back when I used to drink, I would say that there's two types of excessive drinking. There's drinking excessively moderately, and there's drinking excessively. I think you know what I'm talking about. There are people who, can tie on and, get themselves pretty drunk, but it's not like a trip to the hospital or anything like that. They wake up the next day a little banged up, and, everybody moves on with their life. It's the clowns who drink excessively, who are throwing up on the table, who are, you have to spend half the night with them, make sure they don't die, that kind of would ruin fun for everybody. Now, why I say this is, there are heretics out there, and then there are people that the heretics would take a step back and say, whoa, you are really heretical. So, I had a run-in with one of these such people. I really have no idea what this guy's... I thought he was an Ebionites, or it was just like the twilight zone of conversations. Like he was a Christian, so he said he had a low opinion of Paul because he never met Jesus. He trashed the letter of the Hebrews and the authors being inept and just had a very, that was completely uninspired. He lectured me about how Sola Scriptura isn't scriptural, and it was a 16th century theological novum, yet he opposed the deity of Christ. It was just strange. And so two of these arguments aren't really, you're probably not going to really even run into these kind of arguments. But just in case, I just figured I'd take my experience, and if it helps somebody in 20 years, they run into an atheist or a heretic saying this kind of stuff, well, here it is. I challenged this guy on the notion of Hebrews, and I said, look, that's a first century Christian text, and whoever wrote that had very close ties to the apostles. I mean, he knew Timothy. That could have been Paul. No, I don't think it is Paul. He mentions Timothy at the end of the text, so you're trashing a text that is a first century Christian text, and that, is very close to the apostles. And he said, why do you think it's a first century Christian text? And I said, well, I mean, just from the internal evidence alone, they're warning people not to go back to temple sacrifices and this and that. Well, he had some sidestep for that, but one of the strongest pieces of evidence that Hebrews is a first century Christian text is because the letter of 1 Clement, which is conservatively dated to 95 AD, quotes it numerous times. So Hebrews had to be in circulation and whatnot for a good little bit if somebody was quoting it. I think it's the New Testament epistle that Clement quotes from the most. So he shot back that, you can date Clement anywhere from 95 to 140, so that's no reason to assume that Hebrews is a first century text. Well, that's true. Some do date it as late as 140, but I want to show you the crux of it, why that's wrong. If Clement is first century, then Hebrews is first century. And I want to show you how. Now, this is the letter of 1 Clement that I have up here. And this is basically what 1 Clement is about. Is the Church of Corinth bounced out a bunch of their presbyters, and it was very heavy-handed. The presbyters did nothing wrong. The Corinthian elders, the people in Corinth were just being jerks to these people, basically. And the presbyters came to Rome, and this is what happened to us. This is terrible. So the church in Rome took them in and sent a letter to the church in Corinth saying, guys, what's the matter with you? Get your act together. You're going to see in chapters 2, 3, 4, 5, you're going to see them talking about the toxic nature of envy. Just bear with, this has a lot to do with it being first century. So, let's see here. So, I mean, chapter 3 entitled, The Sad State of the Corinthian Church After Sedition Arose from Envy and Emulation. Hence flowed envy, emulation, and envy, strife and sedition, persecution and disorder, war and capacity. Goes on in chapter 4, many evils have flowed from this source from ancient times, talking about Cain being killed, Abel be killed by Cain. Said you see how envy and jealousy led to the murder of a brother. Through envy, also, our father Jacob fled from the face of Esau. Envy made Joseph to be persecuted unto death, coming into bondage. Envy compelled Moses to flee from the face of Pharaoh. On account of envy, Aaron and Miriam had to make their home outside the camp. Envy brought down Dathan and Abiram alive into Hades. Through envy, David underwent hatred of not only foreigners, but was persecuted by King Saul of Israel. Let's not just dwell on ancient examples. Let's take the noble examples furnished in our generation through envy and jealousy. Alright, you get a point. Why am I making this point? Well, Ignatius of Antioch wrote his letters in about 106, 107. Here's his letter to the church in Rome, from where the letter first emanated from. Here's from his short recension. Ye have never envied anyone, ye have taught others. Ye have never envied anyone who taught others. Also in his long recension, ye have never envied anyone, ye have taught others. So, did Ignatius write this? Yeah, I think it's safe to say that he did. And with that in mind, if Ignatius is writing this in 106, this is clearly a reference to the letter of First Clement. I mean, you've never envied anyone, you've taught others. That's him talking about how the church in Rome corrected the church in Corinth for their envy. So if Ignatius knew about that in 106, that has to be First Clement in 95. And with that in mind, that places Hebrews in the first century. And once I showed him that, he really had much to say in that regard. Oh, he had a lot else to say. He had this whole thing about John the Divine, the author of Revelation and whatnot. He was a guy that Polycarp and Ignatius knew. He didn't live. He was killed with his brother James, and well, there's a fragment of the church father Papias in his second book, Oracles of the Lord, that say he was done away. He was killed along with his brother. So he says. Papias in his second book says that John the Divine and James, his brother, were killed by the Jews. The aforementioned Papias, on the authority of the daughters of Philip and Barsabbas, is... Okay. So this guy is trying to make John having been killed middle of the first century, and, you know, I've heard there are fringe atheists who also try to do this and say, see, John couldn't have written Revelation. I think there have been some Muslims who've done this too. Look at this. I mean... He said he was killed, you know, James was killed in about 44 AD. So if this is the case, and this is Papias writing this in the very early second century, what this is, how this works here is Papias is his actual works are no longer extant, but they have been commented on so much throughout Christian history that we have general idea of what he had said. And this this came from a theologian commenting on the works of Papias. His name was Philip of Side, and Philip wrote around the mid-400s. So he was commenting on what Papias said in Book 2 of his piece, Oracles of the Lord. Now, one can read that and think, well, it sounds like James and John were done in the middle of the, probably in the middle of the 2nd century. So then, who would have written Revelation in John's Gospel? Maybe these were not by the Apostle John. Well, hang on. Reading. This is apparently something done. This is also commentary of the same book, the same thing, by George the Sinner. Now, this scholar says this text appears to be an interpolation. It was written by George Harmatolus, also known as George the Sinner. It may be from Codex Coesulianus, but I'm not sure. So perhaps the gentleman named George the Sinner didn't write this, but somebody wrote this commenting on the works, the same work that Philip Side commented on. It said, after Domitian, Nerva reigned 1 year, who recalled John from the island, namely Patmos, and allowed him to dwell in Ephesus. He was at that time the sole survivor of the 12 apostles. After writing his gospel, received the honor of martyrdom. For Papias, bishop of Hierapolis, was an eyewitness of him, and in his second book of Oracles of the Lord says that he was killed by the Jews, and thereby evidently fulfilled, together with his brother, his prophecy concerning them, and his own confession and undertaking on his behalf. So, what this guy did was he took this piece out of context and didn't realize that there was also another theologian who had commented on it, and, I showed that to him and kind of put in his place too. So, yeah, St. John was not killed in the middle of the 2nd century. Yeah, were John and James done away with by the Jews? Yeah. Were they done away with at the same time? No. So I don't know. There's some basically information that you're probably never going to have to use in life, but who knows? If you do, I'm putting it up there anyway. So, thanks for watching. We'll talk to you next time.